This is a Best in Climate episode of Earth Feels, where each week your hosts Rose and Christine read to you from some of the best climate-related blogs and articles on the web.
This week's Best in Climate comes to us from Jens Peterson, a rising sophomore at Clark University, which is actually my alma mater in Worcester, Massachusetts. At the age of 15, Jens recognized the impending catastrophe of climate change and set about answering three vital questions. First, what does it mean that our planet is ill? Second, what is causing her illness? And third, and most importantly, how can we take care of our planet? To that end, he authored the book, What We Leave, A Caretaker's Guide to an Ill Planet, as a guide to the hope that can be found in each and every action we take in support of our environment. Today's reading is the closing chapter of What We Leave. It's a bit of a departure from my usual essays in that it's a dystopian fantasy about what may happen, about what our future may hold, entitled, If We Do Nothing. Junior is spending another sleepless night floating in space, trying to see the stars. The water around him laps relentlessly over his tired body. A few feet below him rests the cobblestones of old new century. Masons had placed these cobblestones over 100 years ago with the hopes of a bright future, one where humanity curbs its greed and lives in balance with the natural world. Now the acidic water gnaws on those stones with contempt. Jellyfish and plankton rule the discolored ocean water. Carbon and nitrogen overloads wiped out most of the competition years ago, turning the ocean highly acidic and a depressing shade of orange. Junior keeps himself afloat with the salvaged tire while straining his eyes toward the smoke-filled skies. Only his face and toes are above the orange waters as he stares up, clinging to his tire and blinking away his heavy exhaustion under the lenses of his gas mask to see the stars. The smog does not relent. It assaults Junior's mask filter and blocks the stars. He sighs with disappointment as rain breaks through the smog. Evidently, real clouds conceal the stars as well. He opens his mouth to catch the rain, but spits it out without swallowing any of it. The acid rain always tastes more sour than his half-gallon ration of filtered water. As the rain falls heavier, Junior begins to kick his legs in a slow, loading march back to shore. Hollow buildings stare down at him while he inches his way back to land to take cover from the furious rain and the relentless ocean. All around him, the storm grows angrier, as if someone told time to march faster. The wind howls, the ocean roars with rain, and great works of architecture continue to corrode away down to the very last pillar. Old New Century holds an eerie resemblance to a shipwreck. The buildings appear as nothing but the skeletal frames of ghost ships, with their crews, no doubt, lying dead beneath them. Not a sound is made by humankind, other than Junior's slow and steady swishes in the water. As Junior's march grows tired, the stormy waves grow angrier. After a few minutes of continuously bringing his legs up and down in one determined stroke against the waves after another, Junior stops. His breathing is heavy, but the waves and the rain are so much heavier. Then the water dips more than its usual ebb and flow, and Junior shuts his eyes and holds his breath in preparation for the coming wave. It strikes a second later, tearing the tire from Junior's arms and hurling his exhausted body under the acidic seas to the street below. His pumping legs flail helplessly against the elements crashing down around him. Dust rises up from the water as Junior's head brushes the corroding cobblestones. Nothing but smoke and water floats above, and nothing but corroding cobblestone lies below. Fear swirls in the dust. Water floods through Junior's mask and into his lungs as his panicked arms push him away from the street. He manages to flip himself in the water. His feet brush the cobblestones and push him to the surface. Junior bursts out into the smog-filled air, sputtering and struggling. He can't see his floating tire, but as Junior whirls around, desperately scanning the dark sea around him, he catches sight of the dim light of street lamps. Those lamps and the dry streets beneath them shine only a few hundred yards away. But the water around him and in his throat won't allow his limbs to work for such a distance. His reeling mind begins to give up, as if he's in a bad dream, and the only way out of his horror is to let the nightmare take its course. The waves and the rain are more determined now than ever to beat Junior down now, just like they ruined the buildings all around him. Junior takes one last look at the towers and housing complex around him. Those tall skeletons loom over the water, submissive to the storms and floods like the one closing in over Junior's head. But they are over the water. New hope floods Junior's mind along with a fresh gush of adrenaline in his veins. Scanning the dark sea once again, Junior can see the outline of a nearby building, still several stories above the ocean. His arms and legs snap into action. Though his limbs still feel like lead, his strokes come in perfect rhythm. He doesn't look forward. He just waits for his fingertips to touch a wall. And soon he grazes softened brick. Then reaching his hand upward toward the sky, he feels his way along the wall until he finds a windowsill. With one last effort, Junior pulls himself up over the windowsill and flops through the empty frame into the room below. Every time the ocean flooded a new part of the city, some residents would try to camp out in the upper floors of evacuated buildings. But even the most stubborn individuals eventually found they could not live in a home whose foundation was turning to dust. Luckily, the floor of the room Junior pulls himself into does not give way under his weight, though it is under several inches of water. Junior hadn't always been a late-night wanderer. Until a few weeks ago, he had been content to spend his time off in the streets of New Century that were still above water, watching TV, or occasionally spending some of his savings to go out with his friends. As the storms and fires that ravaged the planet grew angrier with each passing year, and as the glass glimmer of stars disappeared behind the smog like an aging childhood memory behind adulthood, his old hobbies began to feel empty. As Junior grew from a boy to a young man in a dying world, he felt as though his whole life was just a painting. But it wasn't a colorful painting. It was a simple black and white painting that would smudge or wash away at the slightest drop of water. Everything he did, from the places he went to the food he ate, all felt meaningless. It wasn't as if he'd felt drawn to the ocean. He just wanted a way to escape the city life, even if it was only for a moment. Coasts and thriving forests became history right before Junior's eyes. Even the shops across the city and the world lost their color. Grocery stores became monotone as one plague after another wiped out non-diverse crop gene pools, and bland algae became the main menu. It started when the bees went extinct, and many of the flowers, fruits, berries, and vegetables disappeared from the shelves. One after another, crop species kept disappearing from stores as more and more species that it relied on went extinct. Then, even common livestock died away as it became too expensive to feed them. Junior's meals of algae were always bleak, and the nights and days blended together as time passed him by. But that still didn't explain why he had felt such an urge to float out into the old parts of the city. Perhaps it was just to try to see the stars, but they were nothing but stories of the past. Junior lets out a sigh of frustration and runs his hand through his hair. The room Junior climbed into is dark. The crashing waves, the howling wind, and the thundering rain assault his ears. He leans out of the window, trying to catch his breath in the smog, while he grips the cold, grimy metal of the windowsill. Leaning out into the smoky darkness, Junior cranes his neck in another futile attempt to see the stars. Junior will later find himself unable to recall how long he stood, suspended in the smoky black night, only that he was at peace, save for the intermittent coughing fits. When he finally looks back to the shore where a few street lamps mark the edge of the flood zone, Junior feels rested enough to swim again. The lights look closer now that he is no longer drowning. He looks down into the dark orange waters, takes a deep breath, and jumps in. His feet touch the bottom lightly, but his head still splashes briefly under. Water flushes his heavy mask. Heaving with his legs and arms, Junior brings himself above the cold water and begins to swim as the weather continues to pour its wrath down upon him. Only a few strokes in, it becomes clear to Junior that his body's exhaustion is not the natural soreness he had thought. He feels as though the acidic rain is burning his face and the ocean taking off flakes of his skin, in the same way it turns shells and stones into dust. Junior feels as if each of the billions of microscopic plankton around him are pulling him down. Every part of his body aches as he makes his way toward land and fights to take each breath. Worst of all, despite Junior's confused state as he flounders toward the dim lights, and despite the frigid ocean drenching his whole body, he can feel himself sweating, a cold, feverish sweat. Junior's strokes become weaker and less consistent right along with his breathing. But just as he feels his slow-moving legs begin to sink, he sees a road sign. It's a red stop sign, just a few yards ahead. But more importantly, the whole red octagon stands well above the surface of the water. Junior lets his feet drop, and his toes just barely catch on the cobblestones beneath him. He can stand. He tiptoes uphill to the stop sign and catches hold of it to regain his breath. He is so close to dry land now, and he can make out silhouettes of two people walking along the water. Dry land is so close. Junior wades across the last distance toward the lights. As he emerges victorious from the ocean, Junior realizes he must look quite insane. But the two men on the shore act unfazed. He can tell that one of them is upper class, because not only does the man have an umbrella, but also a servant holding it over him. The wealthy man is unusually small and has a gray beard that looks as if it's been stroked a few too many times. He wears a raincoat despite already having an umbrella. And not only does he apparently refuse to wear a filtration mask, but he casually smokes a cigar while staring at the dark ocean, as if the smog isn't enough for him. His servant, on the other hand, is the size of a small mountain and has smartly covered his face with a filtration mask. His tree trunk arms hold the small black umbrella over his employer, while the rain soaks his own dark hair. The wealthy man turns to face Junior's shivering body. Junior can tell by the look in the man's eyes with their ember reflection of the cigar tip that this is the type of person who never spares a penny for others. There is not even a glint of sympathy for Junior's wretched appearance. The last thing Junior wants to do is ask for help from a man who spends gross amounts of money on fancy cigars and umbrella-holding servants, while others in that very city starve on the street. But Junior needs an ambulance. He can feel his legs growing weaker beneath him and feverish sweat covers his body. As his vision begins to swim, as if he'd stuck his face in a pool of water, his desperation overtakes his disdain towards the cold-hearted, bearded man. So Junior hobbles over to the man. Stopping just outside the umbrella, he manages to say through his parched throat, "Call the hospital. I need an ambulance." The bearded man looks at Junior, calmly blowing smoke into the already filthy air. "Sorry," the bearded man says. "I don't have a cell phone." Before Junior can respond, the cigar smoke throws him into a coughing fit. And as if Junior had already walked away, the bearded man resumes looking out into the ocean. Junior turns his weakening gaze upward towards the servant. pleading for help. But the large man keeps his face hidden behind the filtration mask and makes an effort to look everywhere but at Junior. Once Junior can no longer bear standing before the two men while they stare blankly out into the ocean, he turns away and begins to hobble deeper into the city. He'd been foolish enough to hope for open arms, yet all he'd received was a blank stare and a puff of cigar smoke. Only a block into the city, he spots a bike taxi station. Since most people can't afford cars, bike taxi stations, rows of bikes with passenger carts, all manned by drivers, are common. When Junior reaches the station, his knees give way beneath him, and he catches himself on one of the three walls of the station. The open side of the station is just around the corner, but Junior has lost the remaining strength in his legs and his arms. Desperately, he yells out, "Is anyone in there?" "Yeah," a tired voice answers, "but it costs double in a storm. Do you know how much damage this rain can do to a bike chain?" Junior screams back through the wall, "I need a hospital. I'll find a way to pay you later. I just need to go to a hospital." A face with small, bright eyes and a filtration mask over the mouth and nose pokes around the corner of the bike station. "Oh, you look terrible," says the bright-eyed man in a voice that seems too high-pitched for the muscular frame that follows the mask and bright eyes around the corner. The driver rolls his bike around the station and points to the bench in the small cart attached to his bike. "Get on." Junior doesn't have enough energy left to give the man any word of thanks or properly sit down, so he lets himself flop into the cart. His driver hops on the bike and starts to pedal. Just as Junior's mind floats in and out of consciousness, he hears a strange sound through the rain and waves only a block away, the distant ringing of a cell phone. Junior's desperate swimming through the night felt like a terrible dream, and now, in the passenger cart, his mind slows down as it leans toward actual sleep. He can't see the face of his driver, but the bright-eyed man's body leans forward over the bike handles in concentration as he pedals with steady determination. The storm hammers the streets so hard that the bike tires have to cut through a thin layer of water. All the elements bend on stopping the bright-eyed man, but his legs never falter in their constant circular march. Junior has no sense of time while riding in the cart behind the bike, but soon bright lights blind his already blurred vision, and the rain suddenly stops. Junior is aware of people in white coats and a bed, and the next thing he knows is darkness. Junior inhales violently and sits up like a zombie coming to life. Had it been a dream? No, he definitely still has a fever, and he is definitely still in a hospital bed. He collapses back into the bed. "Your blood is back from the lab," says a nearby voice. Junior looks up and sees a woman in a white coat standing over his bed. The woman continues to talk in a sympathetic voice that has clearly had a lot of practice. "We're so sorry, sir. There are so many foreign chemicals in your body. Sir, we've tried everything we can, but your fever hasn't gone down at all." Junior closes his eyes again, but the sympathetic voice doesn't stop. The doctor continues on about how the hospital has been seeing more and more patients like this, and how she knew how to help him recover from the effects of some of the toxic chemicals in his body, but there is nothing we can guarantee. Then she points to a bag of medicine attached to Junior's arm through an IV and tells him that they are trying to fight any infections that are common in cases like you with antibiotics. But Junior only responds to ask for a glass of water. Eventually, she leaves him. Junior had stopped caring about what the doctor said after she told him, "We've tried everything we can," in that rehearsed voice of sympathy. But now that she is gone, the silence grows more unbearable than the fever. A radio sits on Junior's bedside. He turns it on and listens to a reporter's voice from far away. "He was taken to court today as the families of those that lost their lives in the deadly gas leak in his factory continue to push allegations." Click. Junior changes the channel only to hear the voice of another sad reporter. "Increasingly consistent acid rain has wiped out most of the detail of this ancient statue of the Buddha." Click. "Today, the New York Museum of Natural History is opening an exhibit on an extinct family of creatures once commonly known as bears. The exhibit includes skeletons of both the polar bear and the giant panda. These animals used to roam the land, and they were larger than humans. Can you imagine? They must have looked like giant rats. Click. Scientists are saying that next year will be even hotter than previously thought. The head of the EPA stated in a press conference that it could be the hottest year on record, so America had better roll up its sleeves and fire up its factories to get those air conditioner units rolling out. Bang! Junior knocks the radio off the table, sending it flying across the room and crashing into the floor. Hours pass in complete silence while Junior stares up at the stark white ceiling. His frustration, his fear, and his anger play out their circus inside his head. When he can't bear the silence any longer, he begins talking out loud and asking the questions he can't stop thinking about. Whether he's talking to a higher power or just himself, he doesn't know. So he just asks the sky on the other end of that white ceiling and above all the smog. Why? Why did no one do anything when they had a chance? They had a chance to stop the air and the water and the very land from turning toxic. Yet they did nothing. They had a chance to stop the ocean and the global temperature from rising, and yet they did nothing. They had a chance to preserve energy and life, yet a coughing fit cuts Junior off. The fit lasts longer than any of his previous episodes that night, and he feels as if he has to push a mountain just to breathe. One of the machines by Junior's bed starts beeping desperately, and soon men and women in white coats rush in and surround Junior. With one more effort, Junior breathes out the word, "Why?" So there you have it, a dystopian fantasy or a glimpse at the future through the eyes of a 15-year-old. Jens closes this chapter and the book with this one last paragraph. We are causing the next mass extinction crisis. If we continue down this path, the environment will only continue to look more hostile. It's hard to say what the world will look like as the natural environment continues to crumble, but continuing to do nothing about our dying natural world can't lead to anywhere we want to go. Trying to understand this dying world is complicated, but saving it isn't. Again, Jens started writing this book when he was 15 years old. Gives me pause when the fantasies of kids Jens' age are so foreboding, and yet to write a book at the age of 15 about what needs to happen in order to save our world does give me hope. Jens will be my special guest for this Friday's interview on Earth Feels. I hope you'll join me then and hear what this brilliant young man has to say. Thanks for listening. Catch you next time.
That's this week's episode of Best in Climate for Earth Feels.
Special thanks to singer-songwriter Kristen Hoffman for generously allowing us to use Song for the Ocean. Thanks for listening.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss an episode. Catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Children of the earth, I'm calling out. There's a mission for you and for me.